mid-morning. Perhaps the odd rumble of thunder associated with these. We've got a spell of more persistent rain moving through Northern Ireland into much of Scotland. To the south of that, showers into Wales and the southwest, but in between the showers, some sunshine, and the sun comes out once again in the southeast with temperatures here of 23 Celsius. Average temperatures towards the northwest, where it will stay windy with the risk of gales in the far north. Those winds ease by the start of Wednesday with some early morning sunshine for many. But Storm Agnes is winding itself up in the Atlantic, and that's going to bring a spell of wet and windy weather during Wednesday afternoon and evening. Risk of widespread gales, especially around Irish Sea coasts, where there's the chance of significant disruption on Wednesday afternoon and evening.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. You know this, Benjamin Franklin once said that nothing is certain but death and taxes. But what isn't inevitable is taxing death itself. Prime Minister is reportedly preparing to scrap this unfair and economically harmful inheritance tax, the most unpopular tax in Britain. He has my full support, and I'll be explaining why it harms Britain's economy. As GB News spent today uncovering the migration chaos at the Italian island of Lampedusa, we will be asking if illegal migration is a mere drop in the ocean when compared to 600,000 legal immigrants that came to the UK last year. Well, the Prime Minister has reportedly been urged to tighten visa rules as new figures are set to be released in November. we've seen a number of signs of the end of times for the disastrous, expensive HS2. So far, the costs are apparently unknown, but it was only meant to be £30 billion. Now it's projected to be over £100 billion when finally completed. As with the Prime Minister reportedly considering scrapping its northern leg, is it time to axe the tracks once and for all? Plus, it was a troubling weekend for the civil service after the Telegraph revealed a number of senior civil servants have warned the Cabinet Secretary of the woke takeover of Whitehall. The report revealed everything from gender-neutral language to 30 days of pride calendars, and unfortunately, it's an all-too-familiar story. This wokery has been designed to stop democracy working. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a high-wattage panel this evening. GB News' very own dazzling ray of sunshine, Dr. David Starkey, and the former editor of the Sunday Mirror, Paul Connew. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. You know the format. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight is that the Metropolitan Police has launched an investigation after receiving a number of sex offence allegations against the comedian Russell Brand. The force saying the cases are not recent and no arrests have been made. It follows an investigation by Channel 4's Dispatches, The Times and The Sunday Times. The comedian denies all the accusations against him. Thousands of passengers could have their flights cancelled or delayed after London Gatwick Airport introduced a temporary limit on flights. It's after an outbreak of coronavirus amongst air traffic control staff. There'll be a limit of 800 flights a day until Sunday, which includes both departure and arrival flights. Now, also in the news today, the Army, which was on standby to help the Metropolitan Police, has now been stood down. It's after a significant number of counter-terrorism firearms officers stepped back from their duties after a colleague was charged with murder over the shooting of Chris Cabba in South London last year. The force now says enough officers have returned to duty to meet its counter-terrorism responsibilities without military help. The Greater Manchester Mayor says the North shouldn't have to pay for the government's mismanagement of HS2. Rishi Sunak is refusing to guarantee that the Manchester leg of the line will be completed, with a decision expected to be announced before the Tory party conference next week. And the Home Secretary is calling for unity among Western leaders to combat the global migration crisis. Visiting the United States tomorrow, Suella Braverman will tell an audience in Washington that other countries could learn from the UK's innovative attempts to tackle illegal migrants. She's questioning whether legal frameworks designed more than 50 years ago are still fit for purpose. And the Liberal Democrat leader says the NHS doesn't have enough money, thanks to the Conservatives. In an exclusive interview with GB News, Ed Davey has accused the government of creating a health crisis. Mr Davey says nearly 25% of patients who are in the hospitals today could be discharged into care homes or cared for in their own homes. He says his party's plan of prioritising healthcare would make the NHS more efficient.
One of the interesting things about the Liberal Democrat position is a lot of our extra spending which will help the NHS isn't in the NHS. It's outside the NHS. It's in social care and helping family carers. And this is one of the reasons why the Conservatives have been spending money but not very efficiently. We show through our care policies that if you can get people out of hospital more quickly, put them in their homes, it actually frees up beds.
It's Ed Davey. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
That great record paper, The Times, has reported that a number of sources close to the Prime Minister have confirmed reports that he is drawing up plans to cut and ultimately abolish inheritance tax, perhaps. After last week's pruning of the greenery, the government is going to adopt sensible election-winning policies. According to polling, death duties are the most unpopular taxes in Britain. An opinion poll for 2021 found 24% of the public feel that it's their least favourite tax, with income tax coming in at second place. Despite what might seem counterintuitive, inheritance tax does not raise much money. Receipts reached a record of £7 billion this year, but that's less than 1% of total tax revenue. And this £7 billion comes at a remarkably high economic cost. Now, why is this? Well, economic activity depends on good and successful capital allocation. You want to invest in things that will grow and take money out of things that are not going to grow. But death duties are very distortive. They discourage active investment. They encourage people changing from a bad investment to a good investment. Let me explain why. If you're elderly and you think you may only have a few years to live and you have a capital gain, the combination of capital gains tax and inheritance tax means that on a property investment, £100 of gain becomes £43.20. So that is a tax rate of 28% on the gain, followed by inheritance tax at 40%, meaning you've got less than half of your money at the end of it, of your gain. But that means the elderly allow their assets to stagnate. They don't sell and buy something new because they've got to be so successful with their investments to get back to zero. And then there are the exemptions on death duties, which are highly distorting. Take one example. Farmland is broadly exempt if you own it in the right way, and anyone who's tax planning can ensure that their farmland is exempt. Therefore, if you buy farmland which pays no inheritance tax, that's much better for you than having cash or an investment in equities, in shares, in businesses that are creating growth other than very small businesses, because you keep 100% of it, or your heirs do. But what this does is it puts up the price of farmland. But if you put up the price of farmland, the capital costs to the farmer of buying or renting land is higher, and what that means is that the cost of food for you and for me is higher. Why? Because of inheritance tax. And this is why asset allocation matters. You want people to allocate to the most economically successful area that will give the best return, and don't distort it so that people put money in things purely for tax reasons. But it's also an unfair tax. This is why it's so unpopular, even with people who aren't likely to pay it, because they see that those who have worked hard and saved, have been good citizens, but not been able to make use of tax planning, will get whacked, and their children will get whacked. It's in that sense a double tax, that you're taxed on money where you're already likely to have paid tax during your lifetime. And it's also an unnatural tax. It goes against the grain of society. Why? Because what do most parents want to do? They want to help their children have a good start in life. But if your money gets pinched from you, then that's harder to do. It's unfair, it's economically harmful, and it's trivial. Getting rid of it could be an election winner, not a manifesto pledge. No one will believe a manifesto pledge. We've had those before. We had one from George Osborne in 2010. This is abolition. So the Lib Dems and Labour would clamour for its reintroduction, and the blue wall would be secure. As always, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts on the email that you know off by heart, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm very pleased to be joined now by the author and journalist Ross Clark. Ross, thank you for coming in. Inheritance tax doesn't make a great contribution to the Exchequer. It's a very unpopular tax. But actually, my biggest concern is that it's extremely economically inefficient and distortive. Wouldn't it be sensible to get rid of it?
I think you've made a very good case for closing some of the loopholes, but not for abolishing it altogether. Now, I'm like you, I'm in favour of low taxes. I'm very much against punitive taxation on anything, certainly not on inheritance. But what I want is for everything to be taxed the same. Income, capital gains, inheritance, returns on investments, I think they should all be taxed the same. So, you know, if you inherit 100,000, that's taxed exactly the same as if you'd earned it. I mean, that to me is fairness.
OK. I mean, I actually had a proposal not dissimilar for that for Liz Truss when she became leader last year, to have at least capital gains tax and income tax at the same level, and indeed the VAT and corporation tax. The exemption I'd made for inheritance tax is that it is broadly already taxed money, so you are taxing it twice.
Yeah, but this is a fallacious argument, Jacob, because all money is tax multiple times as it moves through the economy. I mean, you pay your nanny out of taxed income, your nanny has to pay tax, and then if she goes out for afternoon tea and crumpets, the tea shop has to pay tax. So everything is taxed multiple times as it goes through. But there's another very important point to make here.
This is different because money that just sits in your account is not taxed again. It's taxed at a transaction level, but death isn't a financial transaction, it's an act of God.
Well, I think that's a very important point to make here also is that so much of the money that is being inherited now has come in the form of capital gains on main homes, and that, as you know, is not taxed. So, it's a completely non-argument to say that this is money that's been taxed before. So much of it has not been.
No, we may agree on the ridiculousness of some of the exemptions, but the main home one is particularly foolish because it discourages elderly people from downsizing. They need to keep as much as they can, effectively, up to £1 million in the main family home to maintain the exemption. That can't be good policy, can it?
Well, no, it's not good policy, and I think George Osborne was quite wrong to introduce this, extra tax-free threshold for main homes.
It would have been better just to raise the threshold outright, if that's what you wanted to do. Would have been a much better, cleaner policy rather than distorting the property market with this strange add-on.
Well, as I say, I mean, I'm in favour of taxing everything the same, which means that probably, strictly, I would abolish inheritance tax, but I would then tax the,
You tax the recipient, which is what they do in Ireland.
Yeah.
The issue with the exemptions is that they're actually there for a very good reason, that if you take farmland, the farmer with a family farm, farming 200 acres, would be put out of business paying 40% inheritance tax. But it's very difficult to divide up the farmer owning 200 acres between the enormous estate owning thousands of acres. And therefore you create a false market in farmland, as one example, which you would get rid of, and potentially in AIM, in the alternative investment market, which you would get rid of if you got rid of inheritance tax, which would lead to a better allocation of capital towards more productive assets.
Well, I think the far greater distortion of land values, it gets through the planning system, surely. You get an acre of farmland might be worth £5,000. It gets planning permission, it's suddenly worth £1 million. I mean, that's a real big distortion. But when it comes to family businesses, there is a way where you keep a family business going and without it being destroyed by death duties, which is to incorporate it. And there, it has the business or the land, the farming business or any other business, it has a life of its own, and it's only the shares that are taxed, essentially.
But if you did that with a family farm, if you take a farm rather than a firm, the taxing the shares would still mean they had to sell the farm because they wouldn't have the cash to pay the tax.
Maybe small family farms, you can find some kind of exemption.
But then once you've got exemptions, you open up all the problems that I was talking about. That seems to me to be the issue, and that there are very good reasons for the exemptions. They're not just random exemptions. That's why it's so hard. You said at the beginning, just close the loopholes. That's much easier said than done.
Well, I mean, the far bigger distortion is through, it's through wealthy people deliberately buying farmland in order to avoid inheritance tax. Surely there's a system whereby you can allow a little exemption for small family farms, but exclude wealthy individuals who bought thousands of acres just to avoid inheritance tax.
In your approach to a flat tax for everything, what rate would you like to see?
I would like to see a dual rate flat tax, 20 and 40% or thereabouts, whereas 20% on the first 50,000 or something, 40% thereafter. And, I think that is a fair way of doing things. Of course, it will never happen because there's the whole industry of accountants and tax planners who will benefit from a very complex
Who like a complicated tax code. That's a brilliant answer. Thank you so much, Ross, for joining me. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. After the break, I'll be asking GB News' very own ray of sunshine how we solved the migrant crisis. Plus, the man who revealed the woke takeover of Whitehall is waiting in the wings.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. As you probably guessed, I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. But you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Shirley says, inheritance tax has always been a legalised way of stealing from individuals who've worked to put together an amount of money through a life of hard work and saving. It's their money. It's already been taxed at source and should not be up for grabs. Martin says, Martin? Don't like Martin's view at all. Sorry, but you're talking nonsense. Only 4% of people even pay inheritance tax. On that basis, please explain how it's possible to be the most unpopular tax. Martin's getting as robust as one of my panellists. We'll come to that in a moment. Well, it emerged earlier this month that the small Italian island in the Mediterranean, Lampedusa, has become overwhelmed with migrant crossings from North Africa. In just 48 hours, more than 7,000 migrants arrived on an island with a population of just 6,000. But as it happens, there's nothing new about this phenomenon. For years, Lampedusa has been used as a means of entering European territory to apply for asylum. But it just goes to show how disastrous Sir Keir Starmer's proposed EU migrant crisis deal would be for the UK. However, news emerged today suggesting that while the government is focused on solving the Channel migrant crisis, the illegal part of it, the Prime Minister under pressure from the Home Office to tighten visa restrictions for legal migrants. As we covered on the programme earlier this year, it was revealed that net legal migration reached over 600,000 last year, 6 times the limit proposed by David Cameron 13 years ago. New migration figures set to be published in November. Our friends at The Telegraph have suggested this could be the time new restrictions will be implemented. Well, I've got my dazzling ray of sunshine, Dr. David Starkey, and the former editor of the Sunday Mirror, Paul Connew, to discuss this with me. Paul, is this actually right that anybody sensible looking at the figures would think that 50,000 illegal migrants is much less important than 600,000 legal migrants?
In a sense, depends what the legal migrants are, though. Let's be honest about it, Jacob. We do need, for example, in the care home sector. In fact, we are suffering badly there because of the post-Brexit restrictions. I mean, it's a great dilemma. But Lampedusa is obviously a nightmare situation. I've got a friend in the international aid field who's been there regularly and is horrified over it. But it's, in a sense, linked with climate change too. I mean, I'm one of the authors of a book coming out in a few weeks' time called Toxic News Reporting Climate Change, and they're almost the Siamese twin issues, climate change and the migrant crisis.
Sorry, but isn't there another much more obvious element to the North African migration? And it is the catastrophe of liberal intervention in Libya and France, particularly in the Sahel. Climate change is minor compared with these things. There's been a total breakdown of governance, which we, to a very large measure, have stimulated. I'm afraid it is the catastrophe of the notion, begun by Blair and continued, unfortunately, by Cameron, that you can make countries free. One of the other, though clearly not affecting Lampedusa, one of the other sources of immigration is, of course, our catastrophic liberal intervention in Afghanistan. I mean, have you ever done a sillier thing than fight a war for the right of women to wear a miniskirt? The absurdity which we've deliberately destabilised in the name of effectively imposing Western values, or Iraq, with Blair. The catastrophes that we've inflicted, I'm afraid we are reaping the consequences.
Well, I'm a Labour supporter who disagreed with Blair on Iraq, and our interventions in Libya was a disaster. But that doesn't alter the fact, David, that climate change is a significant factor of what's happening.
But sorry, can I just put it to you gently? We can do something about the politics. We can't do anything much about the climate change.
That's an arguable David
point.
Making the brutal point that actually ruthless dictators created more stability in their countries than liberal interventionism, and that liberal interventionism has made things worse in countries where you thought it could not get any worse. Did any of us think anybody could be worse than Saddam Hussein or
it's a mixed bag. I wouldn't totally disagree with that at all. But interventions in the Balkans, was
no, it's another
successful.
it's another disaster. Look at what's going on in Kosovo and Serbia. What you've done, you've created unsustainable statelets that depend on perpetual subsidy and intervention and will collapse at any moment. Once again, generally speaking, this is something that actually takes us right back to the whole question of mass immigration on the scale that we're talking about now. Non-homogenous societies are rarely democratic. Trying to impose democracy on non-homogenous societies is profoundly difficult, which is why America, in its glory days, embarked on a ruthless program of Americanization.
Of the melting pot. But let's come back to legal migration, because that is 12 times illegal migration in this country. You said was for care homes, but I'm very suspicious of that, because we've got, 5 million people in this country of working age who aren't working, and that there is some issue with how our benefit system is working, that people don't feel the need to get jobs, and that we don't actually need to replace them with migrants, and that the concern about immigration, the lack of housing, the lack of hospital places, the lack of school places, is one that's very real for voters up and down the country.
But we have an employment situation here in this country where, with an ageing age profile too, where in fact a lot of jobs, are not being filled, and people don't want to do them. You can't really force people to become care home assistants unless you have.
Can we pick up the care home point? Interestingly enough, the Home Office is particularly worried about the care home visa for the simple reason it's one that's most easy to abuse, and they are very concerned that underqualified, or in fact completely unqualified people nominally coming here to work in care homes, and with, of course, the the right to import their immediate family with them are in fact a scam. And this is not me, wicked right-winger. This is the traditionally leftish Home Office worrying about this. And it seems to me, can we just pause for 1 second? The idea that we import legally a population 2/3 the size of Birmingham or Manchester every year is deranged. What I'm astonished, Jacob, is that we've such a tiny housing shortage.
Yes, indeed.
If you actually think that you are artificially inflating the population in this fashion.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, both. Thanks to my panel. After the break, Mr. Connew and Dr. Starkey will be battling out the question of HS2. Is it time to axe the tracks? Plus, has there been a woke takeover of Whitehall? Is Queen Anne dead?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Today's showers ease overnight, clear spells to come, but further rain arrives during Tuesday. Some of that, once again, will be heavy with a strong breeze, but nothing compared to Agnes. Storm Agnes, named by the Met Office because of the risk of widespread disruption into Wednesday as that arrives. Before that, it will be a breezy night, but nothing out the ordinary, some clear spells, and the lightest winds will be towards the east and south of England. That's where we'll see some mist patches form by dawn. But patchy cloud elsewhere, and that breeze will keep temperatures in the double figures in many spots. First thing, we've got some showers moving into central southern England. They push into the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast by mid-morning. Perhaps the odd rumble of thunder associated with these. We've got a spell of more persistent rain moving through Northern Ireland into much of Scotland. To the south of that, showers into Wales and the southwest, but in between the showers, some sunshine, and the sun comes out once again in the southeast with temperatures here of 23 Celsius. Average temperatures towards the northwest, where it will stay windy with the risk of gales in the far north. Those winds ease by the start of Wednesday with some early morning sunshine for many. But Storm Agnes is winding itself up in the Atlantic, and that's going to bring a spell of wet and windy weather during Wednesday afternoon and evening. Risk of widespread gales, especially around Irish Sea coasts, where there's the chance of significant disruption on Wednesday afternoon and evening.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB Newsers, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Tony says, it is the most hated tax because too many people think they will have to pay it. And Richard says, I can see the good arguments for scrapping inheritance tax. However, if the Conservative Party really wants to sit on the opposition benches, this would seal the deal. Earlier this summer, the highest paid civil service salaries were released, and it was notable how many mandarins were earning well into six figures. But perhaps the most enlightening part of the revelation was that the highest paid civil servant is one Mark Thurston, the Chief Executive Officer of HS2, earning nearly £650,000 a year. These high salaries were meant to ensure that the project was well run, but instead it's been a hopeless example of failure. It was originally meant to cost £30 billion, and it's now projected to be more than £100 billion of your money. Well, the Prime Minister is reportedly under pressure to scrap the leg of the high-speed rail that would connect Birmingham to Manchester, as the former Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, now in charge of the Ministry of Defence, hinted at a shift in policy over the weekend. So could this be yet another wise pivot from the PM? Well, still with me is my panel, historian Dr. David Starkey and the former editor of the Sunday Mirror, Paul Connew. David, HS2's costs have spiralled out of control. No government seems to have been able to get the figures to work. Why are we still spending so much money on a project that is behind schedule and massively over budget?
Because we're throwing good money after bad. It really is as simple as that. Paul Johnson of the Institute of Fiscal Studies appeared on Times Radio this morning, and he said two things. He said the whole thing made him weep, and he doesn't often use language like that. But he said the fundamental thing is the original sin of how it was conceived. And it's really very important that we put the blame where the blame is responsible. It is the last days of Gordon Brown's government when he assembled this weird cabinet of all the talents, which involved a member of the House of Lords, Andrew Adonis, as Secretary of State for Transport. And this abortion is the creation of Andrew Adonis. And if you look at the map, you see why it's a disaster. It deliberately diverges from the line of the existing West Coast main line. It goes through virgin, beautiful and protected countryside. Do you know, can I tell you how it got itself through the most beautiful and important and protected bit of the Chilterns?
Tell us.
A tunnel for high-speed rail, 9.5 miles long. Can you imagine the simple cost of that? And there's another thing, that this again, it is absolutely typical of the Blair and Brown government. It's this notion of blue skies thinking, in which you reach down a project from the skies, deliberately modelled on what other people have done, that's to say, the European high-speed trains, particularly in France, and you transplant it arbitrarily and without thinking to England. A more intelligent country is called Italy. Italy, again, is like us. It's got an intensely varied countryside. It's also got huge areas of protection because of its history, as we do. They did something different. They have swinging trains. They have the pendolinos. And the trouble is, people like Boris Johnson, people like Heseltine, people like Osborne, they're essentially, my HS2 track is longer than your HS2 track.
Paul, I remember the advanced passenger train which swung, and that made everybody seasick when it went at vast speed from London to Scotland. So I'm not sure David's right about that.
We now have Italian Pendolino. So,
all right. We'll come back to it. I want to bring Paul in on blaming Adonis and Brown for this, that they decided it, they didn't think about it properly, it's costing billions, and it should have been scrapped.
A lot's happened since Andrew Adonis and Gordon Brown on this. I know why David wants to blame it all, on the last Labour government. Look, I was never a huge cheerleader for HS2, but I find myself for once in tune with today's Daily Mail, who have also never been great cheerleaders for HS2, but who say it would be a folly and a national embarrassment to scrap it now. I mean, but if HS2 was going to be built, as far as I'm concerned, it should have started north to south and not the other way round.
But you shouldn't spend tens of billion pounds just to avoid embarrassment, should you? That the sunk cost fallacy is
Mr. Blair was rather good at spending lives as well as money.
It's not just embarrassment. It is going to have a damaging economic effect. It's also forged.
Isn't throwing money away going to? We are in a huge. Sorry, think, man. We are in a huge financial crisis. Simply throwing. I mean, this is why Paul Johnson intervenes. Here is the man who has the sanest view of public policy, and he describes it as a demented waste. It's a demented waste because the whole business of connection between Birmingham and Manchester, or Birmingham and Leeds and Birmingham and Newcastle, could have been dealt with for a tenth of the money, infinitely more quickly. Instead, you get this grandiose fantasy. And do you know what? The other key to Adonis is the belief in Europe. All of this was the notion of linking in the whole of Britain into a pan-European network. I'm afraid
But as a Remainer who was at rarity, I did actually, after my Red Wall research, predict Leave would win the referendum, although I also predicted that the public would turn against Brexit, which the polls suggest they have.
Such a pity that you're a Cassandra.
But there's also the big question of why, of the mismanagement involved here. Why can most of Europe, even allowing for your view of special Italian trains, why can they produce cheaper and more efficiently high-speed rail in a way that we've failed to do?
Do you know anything about the two different planning systems? France can simply legislate from the top and bribe people out of the way. We have a planning system which is inductive. It comes up from the bottom, and it's as protected. One of the most important things about England is the beauty of its countryside. And of course, you're agitating about the climate in our earlier discussion. As it were, removing those restrictions will result in massive destruction, which is why we spent so much money.
The planning system for a railway is obviously a private bill, and anybody affected by it can petition Parliament. Their petition has to be considered. It is an extraordinarily democratic process, but that makes it slow.
Yes, I'm looking forward. I'm sure you'll be there as to how divisive any scrapping of HS2 will be at the Tory party conference next weekend.
Which is in Manchester. So it'll be very interesting to see. I will be in Manchester.
Exactly, and you've got the Mayor of West Midlands.
You can report back to us.
The Mayor of West Midlands and Mayor of Manchester in alliance.
Not only can I report back, I'll actually be doing GB News from Manchester Monday and Tuesday next week. Anyway, thanks to my panel. Coming up is the woke infiltration of the civil service threatening our democracy. Some senior civil servants seem to think so.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Pat says, living in impoverished Lincolnshire, where the infrastructure is appalling, I fail to see how the money being spent on HS2 can ever be thought of as a levelling up project. And William says, why don't the Conservatives elevate David Starkey to the House of Lords and give him a government department? He'd run rings around the woke civil servants. That is a great idea. I think you should petition the King for a peerage for David Starkey. And you're right, to petition the King is guaranteed under the Bill of Rights 1688/9. A letter of warning about the ramifications of woke ideology permeating the civil service has been delivered to the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, highlighting the risk such practices pose to civil service impartiality, a pivotal component of our parliamentary democracy. 42 senior civil servants across 16 departments told Mr Case that a woke takeover of Whitehall risks improperly influencing government policy, with the shutdown of gender-critical beliefs being used as an example. One of those who signed the letter told The Telegraph there has been a widespread woke takeover of Whitehall that our most senior officials have swallowed hook, line and sinker. And others have alleged that little action is being taken despite concerns being raised to civil service human resources. Well, I'm now joined by Stephen Edgington, video comment editor at The Telegraph, the man who broke this very important story. Stephen, it is extraordinary, isn't it, that civil servants who believe that a man and a woman are separate and different things and that their sex is determined at birth are being discriminated against within the civil service.
It's extraordinary. It's absolutely wrong from a moral perspective, from a legal perspective. Civil servants must be impartial. They must be politically neutral. And as that letter has shown, there are huge concerns within Whitehall from many civil servants, hundreds of civil servants, I would say, many civil servants who say there's a huge issue here where gender ideology and ideology on race is being pushed in official documents, in official emails, in official training and in official correspondence. And this is wrong on both a moral level and, as I say, an illegal level.
Is it wrong on a legal level? Because, of course, the Equalities Act does recognise people who have had sex changes as a protected characteristic.
When you get into the weeds of this, it's actually a very interesting debate, and you're quite right that the Equality Act protects 9 separate characteristics against discrimination. And this is an excuse that civil servants use when they say that they're pushing this diversity and equality agenda, where I've picked up on some of those individual stories from various departments. However, when you get into the political nature of this stuff, civil servants must be politically neutral, and when the diversity and inclusion agenda becomes political, that's when it is no longer legally sound.
But is it becoming political, or is it just implementing this Act of Parliament? And whether we like the Act of Parliament or not, that is the law of the land, and civil servants have a duty to follow it. What sort of things are being pushed in to civil servants under the diversity inclusion headline?
Well, I'll give you a few examples from various departments. In the Ministry of Justice, a newsletter was written that claimed that having a belief in two genders is a product of colonialism and white supremacy. In the Department for Business and Trade, since June, 5 separate LGBT allies training has taken place. Those are 90 minutes long, and in one of those training sessions, civil servants were told not to use the phrase mum and dad because it might be offensive for those who don't have a mum and a dad. They might have 2 mums or 2 dads. In other departments, we've seen more training. So in one NHS organisation, Bromley Healthcare, in October, they're hosting a 3-day diversity conference where they're going to discuss pronouns. Over 1,000 healthcare workers have been invited to this conference to discuss LGBT issues.
And will they be doing that in their own time or on taxpayer time?
They will be doing it on taxpayer time.
And I read in your piece that the indigenous American tribes were thought not to have had any differentiation between male and female. Is there any evidence for this?
I think that they go to this two-spirit idea. I don't know if you've heard of this sort of idea that in some indigenous tribes across America and North and Canada, they have this other gender, this two-spirit gender. But, I mean, the fact is this doesn't apply to Britain in any way, so I don't know why it's relevant. And then this idea that this belief in, as I said, the belief in two genders is a product of white supremacy. I mean, that's complete nonsense.
But it's obviously true that British colonial figures thought there were only 2 sexes, men and women, didn't they? So when they say that, that is true. And as most of the world thinks that, and the British Empire was enormously influential, is that a fair point, that it's just colonialism?
Well, I think you can take colonialism as one thing, but the white supremacy is quite another. And I don't think that those two things necessarily go together. Now, obviously, most societies, most sort of cultures, I think, recognise that there are men and there are women. But perhaps you can find certain tribes in certain places where they believe in other genders, I don't know. But I think generally it's accepted in sort of part of human nature that there are 2 biological sexes.
And these are determined at birth, and that you can't change them just because you wake up in the morning and think you've decided to be of a different sex.
Absolutely. And if you believe that, and you are a civil servant, some civil servants say that they've been discriminated against and bullied. And one of the stories that I've done that's very, very important, in the Ministry of Justice, earlier this year in March, there was a call discussing diversity with various different members of what are called civil service diversity networks. Now, these are groups within Whitehall who represent various different minority voices. And during this call, gender-critical civil servants, those are civil servants who believe that there are 2 biological sexes, one of them on the call was said to have been accused of holding views that resemble Nazism. Now, this is completely unacceptable. In messages that were published on that Zoom call, other civil servants claimed that gender-critical officials wanted to destroy the LGBT community. Now, we know that many civil servants say that they've been bullied for holding these perfectly respectable views that I suspect the majority of the country would agree with.
OK, so people do sometimes behave badly on all sides of an argument. Is there any redress for civil servants who have, for example, been called a Nazi for holding, as you say, views that many people across the country would hold?
It's a very complicated question, and I'll tell you why. According to a government source, no formal complaint was made about those comments. However, there were some discussions internally around what happened in that meeting. And I believe that there was an outcome where civil servants were spoken to about those comments. So, unfortunately, there was some sort of justice done in this case, but not completely. I mean, and I think most civil servants feel that very, very scared. But when if they go to their bosses and talk about these things, they're not going to know what the answer is going to be necessarily. And unfortunately, the atmosphere in Whitehall has been described as one of fear. And in that letter you described earlier with the 42 civil servants writing to Simon Case, they all said that they'd felt fear of victimisation for expressing their views.
Well, thank you very much for exposing this. It's a really important story, and no doubt we will read more about it. Thank you, Stephen. And now, In extremely serious news, the matter that has been bothering everyone all weekend, the matter of garlic. As we know from Flanders and Swan, the Germans are German, the Russians are red, and the French and Italians eat garlic in bed. But apparently, a cure has been found for the malodorous affront to the olfactory senses that is created by garlic. Well, scientists may have found the solution to this epidemic, which is a bit like the old lady who, having swallowed a fly, then decided to swallow a spider to catch the fly. The spider wriggled and tiggled and wiggled inside her. One unpleasant taste is followed by another. This time, to deal with the garlic, yogurt, specifically of the Greek variant. Supposedly consuming Greek yogurt after a heavy garlic session ameliorates all of the unpleasant symptoms owing to its neutralising properties. But here at State of the Nation, we don't need fancy PhDs or lab coats to solve this problem. The solution is simple. Don't eat garlic. It's a nasty, lingering flavour designed to cover up poor quality food. You can engage in all the mental gymnastics you like to avoid the brute facts of garlic, but the fact of the matter is, it just isn't British. Never was. And with the government talking of a ban on cigarettes, I think it should be garlic first. Well, we like to present both sides of all issues on GB News, so we thought our food correspondent, William Sitwell, may have a thing or two to say about this. Mr. Sitwell, are you going to eat a lot of Greek yogurt to make up for all the garlic you consume?
No, because I don't really mind about stinking of garlic, and I don't mind if other people stink of garlic, because it tells me that they are open-minded people who appreciate one of the great ingredients across the world. And it tells me that they're not a sort of insular, anti-European, Brexity nutter like yourself, wanting to ban garlic because it's not British. I mean, where
aren't you letting down your ancestry? I thought that Sitwell might be a Norman name, and this would explain your desire to eat garlic, but I discover you're actually descended from King Ind of Northumberland. So aren't you letting down the good, honest Saxon by indulging in all this garlic eating?
I couldn't give a damn about my ancestors when it comes to eating well and flavouring my food. Garlic is one of the base, wonderful ingredients in, if you're in an Indian kitchen, the day starts with the crushing of the garlic and the mixing of the garlic and chili. There isn't a French dish, an Italian dish that hasn't got pasta at its base. I've just eaten a wonderful Spanish lentil dish, a lentilla cooked by the amazing Leanne, our children's nanny. The garlic was there redolent, and it was there at the base of the dish. Garlic is a wonderful ingredient. And honestly, people shouldn't worry. I'm worried if people smell because they haven't washed. I really don't mind if they smell because they have a wonderful diet.
But the smell of garlic is even more pungent than the smell of body odour, isn't it? That sort of waft that comes out of people's mouths if they've been gorging on garlic.
I don't find it. I find body odour far more obnoxious than garlic. I don't find garlic too bad. And the other thing is, if someone's eating garlic, eat garlic yourself. And obviously, Jacob, you need to eat garlic because it might offset all the cholesterol that is filling your veins from all the foie gras that you consume.
No, I take statins instead. It's a much better way of dealing with the cholesterol and doesn't make my breath smell.
Oh, God help us. You're taking statin. I mean, honestly, I would take, a little garlic pill, a little bit of crushed garlic. I mean, what's better on a day when, your fridge hasn't got very much in it? You put some sourdough in the toaster. By the way, that's a kind of bread. You cover it with, you grate it, scrape a bit of garlic on it, drizzle a little bit of olive oil on it, and you're in a Mediterranean.
I'm afraid we're not going to agree on this. I think all you need is a Bath Oliver biscuit, a little bit of butter and some cheddar cheese, and then you are set up for life. And a packet of crisps on the side goes down very nicely. Well, William, thank you very much for joining me on this great garlic controversy. That's all from me this evening. Up next, it's the great Professor Daniel Wootton. Daniel, are you a garlic eater?
Oh my goodness, Jacob, I am with you 110% on this. Garlic, do you know, actually banned from my household. I think it is such a despicable food because I'm with you that the garlic breath is just the worst thing in the world. And I hate eating garlic because I never want to inflict that on someone else. So no, I'm with you, not William in this case. I should tell you about the show, shouldn't I? Big one on the way. We're debating the online safety bill and whether it's chilling that Russell Brand's new platform, Rumble, could end up booted in this country with Matt Letizia and Toby Young, plus Celia Walden, Calvin McKenzie and my royal masterminds, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier, all in the house as well this Monday.
Oh, that sounds a brilliant show and really interesting to be talking about the online harms bill. I'm worried about the effect it may have on freedom of speech, but then on the other hand, the need to protect children. That'll be a great programme. It's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been Save the Nation, and the weather in Somerset will be heavenly tomorrow.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Today's showers ease overnight, clear spells to come, but further rain arrives during Tuesday. Some of that, once again, will be heavy with a strong breeze, but nothing compared to Agnes. Storm Agnes, named by the Met Office because of the risk of widespread disruption into Wednesday as that arrives. Before that, it will be a breezy night, but nothing out the ordinary, some clear spells, and the lightest winds will be towards the east and south of England. That's where we'll see some mist patches form by dawn. But patchy cloud elsewhere, and that breeze will keep temperatures in the double figures in many spots. First thing, we've got some showers moving into central southern England. They push into the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast by mid-morning. Perhaps the odd rumble of thunder associated with these. We've got a spell of more persistent rain moving through Northern Ireland into much of Scotland. To the south of that, showers